It was these warp-mind, fanatical rebels who told us that the people are not ripe for monarchy. King, they foamed, is an anachronism of which any civilization must be ashamed. Unable to accept reality that monarchy is the natural form of governance, they try to deny that the king holds his power by the grace of God, to whom alone he is responsible. He chooses his own path and only decides his actions from that point of view. That point of view is manifestation and evidence of a standpoint of person which a naturalist mindset is unable to find category for, so it rejects. Since there is no common denominator for the king and the subjects below, that must mean, says the naturalist, that these so-called unequals, namely the king and the subject, must be in some sense not real, and their existence must have somehow evolved out of the supersensible inequality gap that is certainly there in between them. Either that or liberals are not referring to either the king or the subjects, each of which are unquestionable reality unto themselves, but rather they are referring to the attempted concepts of kings and subjects in their liberal, naturalist mindset. Since the naturalists, such as liberals, are seeing reality, not with sight, but with concepts, they only think they are referring to reality of actual king and subject. Outside of such misreference, there never was a gap between the king and the subjects, since king's superiority does not require categorization, or justification, or definition in order to be real in itself, precisely because it is reality in itself. The self-aware mindset rejects it and rebels against it. In reality, superiority is not supremacy. Reality is not ideology. Besides, he who stops being better stops being good. Superiority of sight over mind is what the knowledge of good and evil is rebelling against. Superiority needs to be accepted unconditionally, accepted, not be justified or explained or accounted for or defined, understood, comprehended, categorized, given root causes or real history or the true meaning behind it, or be equated with something in common. Superiority is truth. Distinctions between identities are truth itself, and truth should be accepted without justification, without questions asked. That is what the naturalist mindset revolts against. What does need to be justified and questioned is the evil ideology requesting to justify sight, speech, and superiority, ideology called democracy as opposed to monarchy. The 19th century arrives, and naturalism is now officially presenting the theory of evolution. Since naturalism in essence is itself the theory evolution, then to date it to the 19th century is not fully accurate. It is no secret that the Greeks theorized about evolution, which was simply their primary issue, namely the so-called changing world, which they also called the world of appearances, or the world of oppositions, or phenomenal world, which they tried to explain away, so they started natural philosophy, which then morphed into natural science, and today naturalists call it the world of inequalities. Their thinking was initiated from the assumptions of the Greek skepticism. The basic premise of the theory of evolution and of naturalism is one and the same, namely that there exists such a thing as change, called multiplicity, or duality, or diversity, of which we are aware of. And how then are we to account for that diversity? How do we reduce that diversity to the so-called unity, simplicity, nowadays called equality, or certain knowledge, or natural science? That is the starting supposition of both the theory of evolution and naturalism, since they are one and the same pseudo-theory. It is called a theory for tactical and polemical reasons, while pursuing its long-term objective of becoming not a theory, but knowledge, and not evolution or change or appearances or inequalities or pluralities or multiplicities, but non-change, one stable reality or object of study. So what does the theory of evolution complain about? It complains that there exists duality or diversity or plurality of things regarded as pollution. The theory thinks on its own that such diversity is the problem to be solved or accounted for, which means to be brought under concept or theory. You want to ask, Why is the diversity of species a problem and a question to be explained? It is not a problem. It is a problem only for a theory rather than to a person, since it is a theory or a conception which reports this alleged diversity. The theory of evolution and naturalism are one and the same theory, as they do not refer to reality, since it is neither reality nor truth that there exists diversity, duality, multiplicity, plurality, pollution or inequality or change, as that is only change or inequality or multiplicity from within the vantage point of theory, and an incomplete theory at that, rather than reality or a being. Diversity within ideology and diversity within reality is not the same thing. Reality regards diversity as reality, final, absolute, unquestionable truth, and reality, whereas ideology regards diversity as ideology, since the ideology is not referring to diversity, but to ideas or concepts of diversity, which it simply calls diversity. This becomes clear when you keep in mind who it is that is referring to diversity, reality, or ideology. The main flaw of the theory of evolution is that the theory of evolution does not have an object of theory, study, or knowledge. Knowledge, if it is to be knowledge, supposed to be about something. The theory of evolution cannot tell us what the theory is referring to what object, since the alleged object is changing, which is to say, it is no object at all. So what are you talking about? Are you even referring to reality? Consistency of theory without correspondence to reality is not reality, but ideology. It is not enough for statements to be consistent with other statements without corresponding to facts. Otherwise, such statements are not truth and reality, but ideology as opposed to science. The problem with the theory of evolution is that upon perception or reception of what is seen there is supposed to be an object which we can describe. But instead, there is an absence of object left after the observer was rejected by naturalism as unreal. The term change or evolution does not even refer to that hypothetical gap or the bottom or the object, but rather to the walls of the abyss. So the theory of evolution cannot categorize that which it wants to reach, its intended end. There is no object of the theory. Change or evolution is not an object. That is because the intended end was merely to turn away from God and away from the language explaining reality as God's will in order to form self-sufficient way called objectivity, a thought from nowhere, as the way of life. But since such thought or knowledge is located in place of language, knowledge and truth, and also because it is incomplete, it cannot be knowledge, word, or language. Naturalism, or the theory of evolution, is that very counter-language, a pack of lies developed to counter language. In reality, the character of language is perpendicular as opposed to formalistic. Language to be language needs to refer outside of formal definitions, outside of concepts, in order to contact reality outside. This is not to say that language itself is not reality. Truth is fact. So, for instance, the term myth was one of the first attack terms invented by the ideology of naturalism against language, since language by its very character provided perpendicular descriptions of reality, which self-awareness by definition could not hope to categorize, thus to know. Keep in mind that naturalism equivocates knowledge, words, and truth with concepts and categories, or universals. Truth and knowledge, however, in reality are not concepts, categories, or ideas. Words are not lacking objectivity just because they do not refer to something other than reality. Since the theory of evolution lacks that which it is supposed to grasp and to know, namely the object of study, it cannot uphold the status of theory or reference or language. For a theory to count as theory, it must have an existing object. Since the theory of evolution cannot tell us what it is that the theory allegedly knows, studies, or theorizes, it does not approach the level of theory. How could a set of incomplete theories, each of which based on the other, come down to language as opposed to noise? It cannot. There is a difference between language and noise. The theory of evolution is noise. Just because the terms of the incomplete theories of evolution have readability to those outside of naturalism, that does not confer status of language or reference, since we remember who the author of the theory of evolution is: the skeptic, the doubter, the reality denialist, the gap of self-reference in reality. Black hole is not directed to reality, but refers to itself. No self-referring theory has started being a language. The knowledge of change or the history of change does not qualify it as a theory, since change or evolution is not an object, let alone a scientific one. That is the issue with naturalism, which claims that we are aware of something. We do not know what it is, and the only thing that we do know is that it, whatever it is changing or revolving. The term evolution is itself a particularly generous term. The term evolution originally came from the term revolution, implying a revolving, cyclical, or circular, vicious reasoning. So the theory of evolution is more about the subject rather than the object. The subject who authors the theory of evolution needs to question himself and his powers of perception before dealing with objective reality. The subject is confused and infused with the spirit of error. Second of all, is it true that there exists a world of diversities? Does the diversity of species actually exist? The answer is no. It is not true that there exists a world of diversities in the first place, since naturalism, or the theory of evolution, cannot be said to be referring to reality, or to the world, or to things in the world, or to many things, or to diversities or species. Theory can only refer to theories, concepts or ideas of things, not to things themselves. Diversities only exist outside of the theory of evolution and naturalism. And what essentially are ideas of things? Ideas of things are those things minus their point of view. So whether the world or nature minus God outside, it is in fact the world or nature is the question, not the necessary truth with which naturalism starts off. That is the dogma of naturalism. The language minus God outside the language is language in the dogma of the skeptics. Inasmuch as sum total of existing things lacks point of view from which it is viewed, there is no need on man's part to devise such vantage point of theory, like naturalism and the theory of evolution set out to do. The very fact that the theory is undertaking to be aware of the so-called diversity or duality, or the so-called many things or multiplicity of things, or the diversity of things, is indicative that the theory is not referring to reality at all, since to a man or to a being there exists no multiplicity, and as such, the theory itself is self-reference. For in reality, a being in reality is concerned with one thing at a time. He sees one thing at a time. To see many things is the evidence the author is not an observer but a self-centered thinker, a doubter of reality, not reality. Observers or people in reality do not see many species or diversity of things at all. Only theorists do. The dogmatic theorists who try to conceive hypothetical theory from the point of which alone there exists diversity of species. By contrast, people in reality do not see the many-nesses of reality. They see purpose. What they see is opportunity and their purpose. That is to say, they always see one thing at a time, not many things. They do not see inequality so-called. People with their purpose are reality, and everything outside them is not reality but nothing, until they select their purpose, namely the one thing which is of interest to them to look at. It is only those theorists who postulate the existence of diversities or dualities, such as the environment or the people. Outside of the theories of naturalism, there is no environment or the people or anything. The awareness of the mind does not enter into reference of the observer. The best response to the environmentalist who tells you, "But what about the environment?" is, "There is no such thing." Environment minus the observing people and their purpose, such as production, is not the environment. It is just your awareness and idea in a larger attempted theory, not reality. The ideology of environmentalism is the actual pollution of the environment. Likewise, all the tenets of the theory of evolution are not reports of objects of reality, since they are not references to things in reality, such as DNA, but rather to things minus that which naturalism and natural science was formed to eradicate: perspective, purpose, sight.